Back for another competitive game? I hope so, because I'm trying to make GABE work against food codes. I know it sounds like a futile effort. Criminals have a very hard time versus Glacier, and this is definitely no exception, considering you need to steal 4 agendas to win the game. But if you remember the last time I played my GABE deck, it was with a Notoriety, and I think that will work pretty well. So let's see. First I install Ferry and run HQ to get my money, my GABE money, but more importantly, I want to defend myself against Architect, and if he reses anything that is, if he reses an Architect here, I would get through, install Mimic, and then siphon him down. So what I really want to do here is to abuse the fact that I can siphon him. Force him to res the HQ Ice. If he doesn't res it, I get 2 credits. If he reses it, he's in a pretty bad spot as well, because I can now siphon through Eli. No Corroder in my hand, but I can click through Eli. Next turn, of course. For this turn, I'll click through and get 2 credits for N1 access for running into HQ, which I guess is worth it. And then he does the right thing here. He protects HQ with a second piece of ice, so I cannot blind siphon him, sadly. So I continue drawing right here, and I find a Faust. My hand is flooded with programs, and that's a big problem, because I can't really play Faust at this point. If I do, and I choose to break something with Faust, I'm forced to trash all my programs to use Faust to break stuff, which is not good. So this is actually a pretty bad hand. In fact, the best move for me right here is to Parasite the Eli, which is really suboptimal. I can't really play the second Fairy. If he doesn't have any sentries on the board, I will use up my memory pretty quickly. So yeah, program flood is actually a real problem for GABE, because now I'm really limited in my options. I can't overdraw because I cannot afford to pitch stuff like Mimic and York into the bin. And I can't afford to play them either. I'm not that rich. Yep, it's a pretty tough bind to be in, and when you're locked out of HQ, things get even harder. Now my opponent gets to solidify his R&D as well. Big problem there. I draw into a Day Job and a Sneak Door, and I think my course of action here is pretty clear. Sneak Door in for some money. Force him to spend Ice to defend Archives as well. I see a Turing, not of much consequence, but if you see a Turing in your opponent's hand, you can be pretty sure that that means they have no campaigns in their hand, because if he did have a money card, he would be playing it behind a Turing right now. So my opponent has a bit of a credit. He's doing okay in credits, but he really needs some ice to protect Archives, and so he does. He installs something on Archives so that I cannot sneak door in, and begins setting up presumably his Turing remote. Of course, I still sneak door here because I'm not afraid of sentries, and I bump into the Turing that I saw in his hand. How convenient. He was so desperate, he had no other ice, so he had to place a Turing on Archives. It's about to be nullified, as you see in my hand. That York is going to come into play right here. And yep, I'm going to install it after taking a credit and sneak door in. So this is looking very good for me. Yes, I'm getting to infiltrate his hand, and I see a Vitruvius. That is mine. The strong HQ pressure that GABE poses is a very huge factor. He has to get rid of the agendas in his hand, especially if he hasn't seen a Jackson. Well, he has, so he's going to purge the agendas away. Very timely for him as well, because if he had any other agendas in his hand, he has to get rid of them. Otherwise, I'll be sneak dooring in next turn for sure, even if it's just to get my 2 credits. He cannot afford to have any agendas in hand at all. And that is something that you always have to take note against GABE. It really comes down to how flooded you are early on. If you are really flooded, there's very little you can do to win the game once Sneak Door hits the board. On the other hand, if all your agendas are clumped at the bottom of R&D, you actually stand a pretty good chance. So he pitches a number of cards, presumably including a bunch of agendas, and I'm still going to continue Sneak Dooring him. I mean, it's 2 credits for free. Why wouldn't you? That nullifying that Turing with York felt so good. Spent 4 credits on his part. I had to spend 5 credits, but now I can walk through his Enigmas as well, so it's well worth it. And he's having a very hard time deciding what to discard from his hand. So at this point, I would like to draw more cards because I need more options, especially with regards to getting through his HQ, and I find the Desperado, which is pretty nifty. So I click for credit, install Desperado, and sneak door last click. Let's see what I find here. Archive memories, not too much of a surprise. Now, one possible mistake I made, I probably should have forced the Jackson use. There were obviously agendas in archives. The main reason I couldn't force the Jackson use was because I didn't have enough money to install the Desperado, which I really wanted to, because I was running out of memory. So what do I do here? I can afford to sneak door or run HQ. Here I decide to sneak door into an Ichi2. And here I make the first big mistake of the game. Instead of clicking through the Ichi, I boost it with Fairy. What was I thinking? What was I thinking? He had no credits. I could easily beat the trace tree of the Ichi2 and get 3 credits back for the successful run. But instead I'm using Fairy and paying 3 credits to break with Fairy and losing my last copy of Fairy. That was a very dumb decision. I chose to do it because I wanted to free up memory space for installing the stuff in my hand, but that was a dumb choice. He couldn't boost the Ichi trace. I shouldn't have been worried about that. And yes, I'm going to pay the iron price now because I see the Crisium Grid in his hand that I cannot trash. That is probably the last thing you want to see as GABE, because you know for sure that's going on HQ, and that nullifies your siphon as well. Now I spend the next few clicks just running his central servers because I can, and because he has no money left. I see a Caprice that goes in the bin. I hit R&D again. I'm just gonna dig as hard as I can and getting my Desperado money. That's an NAPD contract. I have to steal it. You have to steal these things while you can. And this gives me one more run on R&D. What do I see here? It's global food. Wow, my excesses are pretty on point. So, even though I made the huge mistake of trashing my Fairy and not being able to trash his Crisium Grid, which is now in HQ, at least I'm on match point, which means that I can potentially win via notoriety. That's something I have to keep in mind. Now, there's an Eli on HQ. I think I click. I click through here because I know he cannot res the Crisium Grid. So I'm just doing this to get 3 credits, and I see the same archive memories, and I see the Crisium Grid, which I cannot trash again. Not much I can do about that. I draw into a security testing, and that ends my turn. So he's still on 0 credits. This is not where you want to be as HB, and because of that I can easily exploit it as GABE. I made a mistake last turn, if you notice. On my 4th click I drew the security testing. What I really should have done was to poke R&D. Because he had no credits, he couldn't res anything. So that was a big mistake on my part. You should always run if the Corp is bankrupt. That is a no-brainer. You don't have to worry about traps like snares, Junebugs, if the Corp has no money. You should always run, especially if you're GABE and have a Desperado out. So yes, big mistake, cost me 1 excess. And as I said, I run notoriety in this deck. I have the winning agenda in hand. How often do you get to say that as the runner? All I need to do is to poke his centrals once each to win the game. And of course, get rid of the Crisium on HQ, because there's a good chance that he'll res it from now on. It's quite annoying because I haven't found my breach yet. The alternative is using Faust, but there are not that many cards in my hand that I want to chuck, and paying 4 cards to get through Eli is a huge problem because I still have to deal with the R&D ice. I really need my breach, and so I'm going to spend my time setting up instead of running his servers. There's not much point in running his servers anyway. I guess I could click for credit and attempt to trash the Crisium on HQ. But do note that that's a pretty futile effort as well. You know he has archive memories in hand. He's just gonna resurrect the Crisium and make life very difficult for me. So yes, that is a real problem. In fact, my security testing is pretty useless right now. I do attempt to security test HQ. And with my 6 credits, I pose a dilemma. Either he reses Crisium and forces me not to get any credits, or he doesn't res Crisium and I get a lot of money. I think the choice is pretty obvious here. He has to res Crisium. But I think he doesn't here for some reason, and that's a big mistake. Because that gave me 5 credits. 2 from GABE, 1 from Desperado, 2 from security testing. That is a huge mistake. 3 clicks for 5 credits, that's a very big swing. And that gave me enough money to install the files. Note that I haven't found my drug dealers yet, which is both a good and bad thing. Often I find myself too poor to play when I have drug dealers on the board, but here I find that I do need the card draw because I really want to make one successful run on each server. So he does finally stabilize by getting an Adonis off. He doesn't have too many credits, but you can be sure he's going to get there eventually. So, what can I do here? Will the same plan work? I don't think he's going to allow me to do the same security testing on HQ again. And I really do want to get rid of that Crucium anyway. So I security test R&D instead and try to draw for some solution. Mostly at this point I'm just drawing for breach to get past the Eli without having to spend all my clicks. I do find a plus creep, which isn't very useful in this matchup. A gamble, which is kind of useful. The day job, I guess, is not that necessary anymore, but it's still nice to have more credits. Another big problem I'm facing is the Ichi2 on archives. Ideally, I want an emergency shutdown to get rid of it, but it's not really necessary if you think about it. I'm trying to get notoriety off, so what I actually want to do is to run through the Ichi, let him trash all my programs, it doesn't matter because I can play the notoriety to win anyway. So the game plan right now is to run HQ, run R&D, run archives, win. The only problem with that, however, is firstly, I'm not allowed to click through any bioroids. I need the last click to play notoriety, and more importantly, I need to worry about the trace tree on the Ichi2. It's very, very rare that the Ichi trace is more of a problem than the trash program subroutine, but in this case it is. I cannot afford to take brain damage, because if it snipes my notoriety, I lose. Outright. Game over. And of course, I obviously have the alternative of simply finding the final agenda from his deck or his hand to win. And it's quite likely that his agenda flooded at this point. Unfortunately, I just can't get into any of his servers. I could sneak door through Ichi2. It's not really worth it unless I have an emergency shutdown in hand. So I decide not to do that. Instead, I'm going to set up my board state so that I can make the all-powerful final turn involving notoriety. That's what I'm setting up for. Unfortunately, I'm giving him a lot of space to breathe, a lot of time to deal with the agendas in his hand and the Adonis in the remote, and that's a big mistake. As a criminal, you really need to keep the pressure up. And this, you might question, if you need to keep the pressure up, why do you play day job? Day job is pretty bad for that. My answer is quite simple. Day job is a necessity because when you play drug dealer, you often find yourself without the burst econ to get going, and that can easily cost you games. Day job mitigates that somewhat, and more importantly, is an alternative form of reliable economy when you do not have security testing and bank job enabled. My opponent here, James, has now learned how to play against Gabe optimally. He only creates one remote server. He doesn't bother with a secondary scoring server. He doesn't bother with a naked Breaker Bay Grid into Eve campaign. He knows that I run bank job, and the optimal move for him is to simply focus on one remote server and suffocate me from my Gabe money. I'm going to get through HQ here because I really want to trash the Crucium, so I get rid of a lot of cards in my hand, including only sparing the account siphon and the game winning notoriety. Of course he resists the Crucium here, so I finally get to trash that, which is good. Means that now I can siphon and play notoriety against him, assuming he doesn't recur the Crucium, of course. So that's a very powerful line of play that my opponent has, and I'm sure it's running through his mind, but instead he goes to get some money and starts hunting the Turing remote. At this point, my security testing is all but dead. I do have inside job, which I just drew, so I can actually use that in conjunction with bank job, except I have no money. Drug dealer, man. It really saps clicks from you. It's a worse version of Wildside if you are poor. It requires, I need 3 credits to get enough capital to even land the bank job. And if you're wondering, I do need the money because my ultimate game plan is to install Breach and to pull off a notoriety, including paying 8 credits to get through 2 Elis. That's a lot of money that I need. So, the bank job goes on the table, and hopefully I can inside job the server next turn. But of course, against food codes, you have to keep in mind of the worst case scenario, which is Caprice in the remote. I think that is a big problem that you definitely will face because you can't pull off a bank job if there's a caprice on that remote. And yeah, there's a very good chance that it is a caprice. So my opponent pulled off an ABT, got an Ichi on HQ. So now at this point it gets nearly impossible to pull off the notoriety. I'm still keeping it in my hand. One can only hope. But the chances are just so slim. I think at this point I'm just saving my inside job to pull off the big notoriety run instead, which works. Inside job is a very good criminal tool for using for getting a notoriety off. This is why I think it's worth playing in criminal. In Anarch or Shaper, maybe not so. I'm also hogging to my siphons because I have no idea. Actually, the siphons are not doing much work at all. Look at that HQ. How am I supposed to get a successful siphon? Even if I use breach, I'm coming out behind in terms of credits. All I'm doing is slowing down the Corp and taking tags, which may not be the best thing in the world. So at this point, I'm dead suffocated, and my opponent is slowly but surely climbing up to 7 points. So I finally find a breach, and it's going on the table. With a sure gamble, I now have a few credits to play around with, but time is not on my side. Another ABT goes down, another Jackson fires. Another ABT fires with Jackson on the table. Let's see what he dumps this time. Oh, that is brutal. That is very, very brutal. So the ABTs, how much work did the ABTs do for my opponent? Well, that's 5 credits plus 4 credits plus 2 plus 3. He saved 14 credits and 2 clicks by pulling off those 2 ABTs and at no cost. Or is there a cost? I made the big mistake of not checking archives at all after the 2 ABTs. The second one obviously involves a Jackson, but the first ABT actually dumped agendas in there. I realized after the game when my opponent told me, and I didn't check it. There was no Jackson on the board. I could have checked it, but I did not. I would have won the game if I actually went to check archives, but I couldn't. It wasn't worth it. That Ichi 2 is too oppressive, but I really should have checked it. Now he gets the 6 agenda points and a Vitruvius counter, so I'm all but dead in the water. The Vitruvius counter is huge in food codes. It allows you to recur any upgrade that you need. And can I get the big notoriety off this turn? Since I've been clicking for credits endlessly last turn, I can actually pull an account siphon off, and because he did not fortify HQ with Christian Grid, I think I'm gonna get through. I am clicking through the entire Ichi. This is not going to be a notoriety turn. This is going to be a I'm going to gain a couple of credits turn. And yeah, at least I get to trigger Gabe's ability as well. So now with 14 credits, I can foreseeably actually get through all 3 centrals. But then, yep, an upgrade goes on HQ to foil my plan. Now what? Now what? I guess my only option at this point is to hit HQ. I could sneak door and click through the Ichi. I think that would have been a better play, except that Sneak Door is gone. I can't afford to reinstall Sneak Door because I'll have to trash a Faust or a Mimic, and neither of these are good options, especially with Architect Res on HQ already. So yeah, I'm locked out. Completely locked out. My only hope at this point is actually to top deck an agenda of R&D. And who knows what ice is on R&D? Probably an Assassin. There's a very good chance. Nonetheless, I still go for HQ because why not? I'm gonna break through everything again, spending my entire turn on the Ichi 1, which is causing me a lot of problems. And breaking through the Eli's the painful way, down to 6 credits. What is it? It's a Christian Grid that I'm forced to trash. Great. Well, I couldn't even trash a Breaker Bay Grid from his hand because after trashing the Christian, I'm down to 1 credit. And if there's any time to score an agenda, this is it. He gets an agenda in the remote. It looks like a food, otherwise he wouldn't double advance it. Almost taunting me, but realistically, I'm never gonna get in that server. I have an inside job, but I have no way to get past that Turing. My only solution to Turing is York and Data Sucker, and I haven't seen a single sucker this entire game. Doesn't help that. Well, I concede, click for 4 credits, and let him score the winning agenda. So it seems like a huge pity that the game-winning agenda was in my hand for half the game and I didn't manage to pull off the notoriety. Well, if there's anything this recording is, it is a demonstration of how to effectively lock Gabriel Santiago out. James, my opponent, played very, very well. We played a lot of games prior to this, and he has really learned a lot of strategies. I'll list them right here. That they are very, very effective at keeping Gabe at bay. Number 1, always keep unrest eyes on HQ or make it impossibly taxing. You notice that he immediately covered the Eli on HQ as soon as he rezzed it, the very next turn. That prevented me from siphoning him. And from that point on, there was always unrest eyes on HQ. I could never afford to run. Had I ran the Eli on HQ, he wouldn't have rezzed the outer eyes. He would have let me go in. I would be forced to click through the Eli. That's not good for me. And by the time I found the breach, HQ became impossibly taxing. Architect EG, Eli. That's terrible. So at that point, there's no point siphoning, and that is when you're winning against Gabe. When Gabe cannot gain 13 credits from an account siphon. Do not make a new remote until you can afford to defend it. Bank Job is one of the biggest sources of income for Gabe. It's such good burst economy, and a lot of decks such as Astrobiotics rely on horizontal play. Do not fall into that trap. You can afford to play slower against Gabe because Gabe is pretty lousy late game. You don't need to rush an early campaign like you do against Anarchs and Shapers. Stabilize your centrals and then go for the remote when you find a Turing or something similar. Number 3, preemptively ice up archives. This is a tactic that anyone knows since the core set, when Sneak Door Beta was already in print. You have to defend against Sneak Door Beta. It is a very powerful card for Gabe, and you can bet your life they're running it. Number 4, if you have a Christian Grid on HQ, you should almost always res it during successful HQ runs. Of course, there are always exceptions, but generally, being able to there are too many benefits to resing Christian. So there are too many benefits to resing Christian basically. Basically the only situation where you wouldn't res Christian is if it costs no money for Gabe to get to your HQ, which shouldn't be the case really. For example, if you mulligan and have no ice, all you have is a Christian, then fine, you can put the Christian on HQ. You probably don't want to res it. You might still do that to deny the siphon money, but otherwise, as long as it costs Gabe some money to get in, you should always res the Christian. Not only do you deny him his ID ability, you deny Desperado, Data Sucker, and Emergency Shutdown as well. Finally, be always prepared to sack Jackson. A lot of times players install Jackson and keep drawing up. They tend not to sack Jackson, especially against Gabe where your archives is usually iced up. One might think that it's fine for the runner to trash Jackson, leaving them 3 credits poorer and slowing them down massively. But against Gabe, you cannot do that because he's not going to trash Jackson, he's just going to get his bank job money. And you cannot afford to let Gabe get rich like that. So when you install a Jackson in an unprotected server, always be prepared to defend it or to sack it. So lots of tactics, but as you play this matchup more and more, you get more used to it and you realize that it's actually not that difficult to keep Gabe out as a Glacier deck, especially one as strong as Food Codes. Thanks for watching, happy net running, hope this was informative.